Welcome, everyone. I am excited to introduce our special guest today, Cindy Goldrich. Cindy is a Columbia University graduate and a leading authority on parenting and teaching children with ADHD, executive function, and learning disabilities. Her list of achievements is really impressive. She's a mental health counselor, certified ADHD clinical service provider, ADHD parent coach trainer, and a teacher trainer. She's also on a public board, policy board of CHAD, and a regular contributor to Attitude magazine. As the founder of PTS Coaching, Cindy created and leads the highly acclaimed workshop series Calm and Connected, parenting children and teens with ADHD or executive function challenges, which is offered in 3 different languages. She has provided professional development and parent coaching to thousands across the US. But that is really not all. She has also personally trained with some of the biggest names in the parenting world, which is such as Ed Hallowell, Dr. Edward Hollowell, and Dr. Ross Green. Cindy, hi, and welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really honored. I'm happy to be with you.
So let's just to start off. What do you think is the one most important thing that the majority of parents and teachers really still don't get about how ADHD really affects the kids' behavior?
Yeah. Wow, that's hard to narrow it down into one thing, but I will say this. Kids do well if they can. And when you're seeing these challenging behaviors, understand and really start to trust that if they could do better, they probably would. They're not benefiting by, getting all this negative attention and taking longer to do everything and not succeeding. So they're really struggling, but they don't know why. And if we don't wonder why, rather than try to change what we don't understand, we're missing the mark.
Exactly. And considering the increase in ADHD diagnosis and also misdiagnosis, how should we approach supporting these kids? Like, do they need individualized school plans, or should parents and teachers just work on skill building to help them integrate better? What would be your advice?
Well, my advice is this um, two things. I work with parenting and I work with teachers because I really believe in that full circle of support. So, in the parenting world, I never worried if a child is diagnosed or not diagnosed. I'm not worried about that. If a parent is struggling, if a parent is noticing behaviors that they're really, feeling are just off, then I think the first and most important thing is parent education. And I don't just mean reading a quick little pamphlet, I mean really understanding the social and emotional impact that ADHD and executive function challenges have on learning, motivation, behavior, and their whole family system. And I would say the same thing with educators. My daughter's a teacher. She's a special ed teacher. I think the world of teachers, right? But it is not in their training to understand ADHD and executive function challenges. So parents have a lot of expectation of the teachers, and teachers honestly want to do well by the kids, but they don't have the training. What I have found, because I've been going into school districts, all over the place for years and years and years, is that when the teachers understand, just as I was saying with the parents, that social emotional impact of ADHD and executive function, their natural way of teaching starts to shift. Schools call me up all the time. Can I come in and teach their teachers, tools and strategies to work on executive function? And I say, yes, I can. But the reality is, you could find a lot of things on Google. You could read a lot of books. Here are some tips and tools and strategies, and that's all great. But I need to work with them first so that they understand that child, right? And the kid that's it. So I really want them to experience what it's like, to be that kid, to have maybe a slower processing speed or a weaker working memory or any of those different issues. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But to just put a pin on this, I have found that when you train teachers, the whole classroom benefits, not just the kids with ADHD. because they're understanding behavior, they're understanding how to look at the kid. And when you deal with the most challenging kids and you can deal with them, then everything else calms down and you have more time to teach. And it's the same thing with the parents. When they understand that challenging kid, all the whole family system works better.
Exactly. It all starts with us, right?
It does.
Well, kids with ADHD can really struggle with the routine and really switching between tasks and school. However, you suggest that the key is keeping things like the key is to keep calm to the transition in a way that the child doesn't even realize that they've switched gears. Could you share more about this approach and how it really works and how it actually helps them?
Absolutely. First, we have to start by looking at what is a transition. So, transition is actually three things. First, you have to stop doing the activity. Then, you have to move cognitively or physically to that next activity. And then you have to start. So, if we look at it from that standpoint, then we don't just say, my kid has a hard time getting out of the house in the morning. I say, okay, let's break that down. What is he needing to stop doing? And I wonder why he's not having, why he's having trouble stopping. Is it his preferred activity? Is it something that he feels like if I stop, I'm never going to get to do it, later in the day? Or if I stop, am I going to get in trouble because I didn't finish it? In other words, there's all sorts of reasons why people have a hard time stopping. So I want to first address that. And I have lots of tools and strategies around doing that. Then I want to think about, well, how does he feel about where he's going? Is he excited to do that next activity? Is he dreading it? So, what's that experience like? And then the starting the activity, we know that the ability to get started, which we call initiation, is actually an executive function skill, right? The ability to get started on something without undue procrastination is a skill. We can't just keep saying, come on, it's March. We've been talking about this since January. You should know what to do. It's time to get started. If a kid is not getting started, you can assume it's a lagging skill. And we need to build that skill or problem solve around it.
Amazing. I like that three-step approach. So, what are some like practical ways that teachers can support a kid with ADHD in a full classroom? We've talked about this before. And also, more importantly, maybe, how can parents really help with this? You mentioned that the first thing is that they're not trained to do it, but how can we help the parents, understand and help the teachers with it?
Right. Absolutely. One of the things I would say is include the kid in the conversation. Very often we talk about the kid, right? But and we come up with all sorts of great plans like, okay, Johnny's going to do this and this, or we're going to help him with this and this. And Johnny's like, I don't want that help. I don't know why I need that help. I feel funny getting that help. I don't want to be the center of attention. So the first thing we need to do is kind of slow down and problem solve and say, okay, what would Johnny do better if he could? And then let's look at that. And I know for teachers, they have so much on their plate. They've got, let's say, between 15 and, 25, 30 kids in their class. They can't just pay just attention to Johnny. So we're going to front load this and we're going to figure out, okay, what are some of the patterns of behavior that we notice? Some kids, like I said, with initiation are going to have a hard time getting started. I'm going to talk to Johnny about and the whole class, in fact, and this is why I say teacher training is so important. I may talk to the whole class and say, hey, I know some of you getting back from lunch and starting your work is really hard. Let's talk about that for 5 minutes. Let's come up with, and then I've solved it for a lot of the kids, and then the kids I haven't solved it for yet, then I'll have some private conversations around. And I can do this with any subject, right? And teachers will say, well, I don't have time for that. But then I ask you, how much time are you spending redirecting these kids, right? Think about all those off task behaviors and all the times you're saying, come on, class, we got to do this. I want to say, In fact, my ideal school is let's spend the first 2 weeks of school just teaching kids about their brain, about how they learn, about what executive functions are. I mean, I have a chart. I'll just show you. This is hanging in classrooms all across the country, right? Across the world, in fact, where literally we're teaching kids what executive functions are. And I can, with my resources, I can show you where you can find that. But the point is, let's include the kid so that rather than him feeling shame because he can't get organized or he can't get started or anything else, we're saying, hey, let's figure out how to train that part of your brain. So those are some of the things I like to really work with.
I love that. Love it. Okay, let's now dive into independence. I've noticed that parents often do things for their kids, right? Especially when we're in a hurry and we need them to comply really quickly. But this probably happens even more with kids that have ADHD because really of how their brain works. What advice would you have for parents in these situations in terms of independence?
Absolutely. Well, parenting's complex, right? I mean, it's hard. And when you've got a complex kid, it's even harder. So that idea of I want him to be independent is really not the right goal in terms of my assessment. It's really helping him move forward. Because let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say the kid's in 5th grade, but he's acting more like a 3rd grader. Not in his intelligence, because most of these kids are highly intelligent. This has nothing to do with intelligence. This has to do with their executive functioning, how they do what they intend to do. So let's say he's operating down here. If I keep focusing on, well, but he should be over here, chances are the kid's going to fall further behind because he's going to get stressed out, he's going to feel depressed, he's going to feel judged, everything else. But if I meet him closer to where he actually is, then he can come along with me. So that's why I'm saying I don't worry about the independence. I worry about helping him move forward in his skills.
I love that. How do we do that?
How do we do that? Well, the first thing we do is, and I have this conversation with parents all the time. Parents don't always know, am I enabling my kid or supporting my kid every time I go to help? Right? So we have to look at how do we know that difference? To me, part of that difference is the kid response able if all the stars are aligned? In other words, can we see that he can do that behavior to begin with? If he can, then I want to see, well, where does it break down? I mean, he knows how to go get his backpack. I mean, he knows how to get his equipment to go skiing or play basketball or guitar or whatever that he really loves. He seems to be right on there. But if I say, hey, go pack up your backpack for school, he's not doing it. So what do I assume? He's lazy, he doesn't care, he's defiant, all of those things. But I have to understand what's different in those requests. And some of this goes back to that idea of initiation and the transitions, but some of this goes to, you know, what's lining up his brain. Remember that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. You can see the differences in the brain. So I have to understand before I just have that same expectation what's going on with the kid. Does that make
That's
sense?
Yeah, totally. Thanks for sharing it. That's awesome. Well, essentially, you also say that parents should aim to help their child take more ownership and responsibility. First, let's talk some more about the most common things that parents often do that have the opposite effect. I mean, what should they stop doing that they're
Right.
doing now?
How about this one? Johnny, if you just would finish your work, you can go out and play. Your friends are out there playing, thinking that I'm motivating him, right? But what we have to understand about the brain, okay, is let's say this is your brain. Here's the front part of the brain where the executive function is, the prefrontal cortex. Here's the back part of the brain where the amygdala is, that's the emotions. And the brain develops from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. right? And we know that with kids with ADHD, their development is slower. It could be up to 30% delayed. Again, nothing to do with intelligence, right? So if I am finding that my kid is stressing out, guess what happened? Because I just said, your friends are out there playing. Guess what happened to his executive function system? It froze because now he's all in his emotions. So he can't think, he can't plan, he can't organize, he can't activate all of those things. So parents think that they're motivating their kid, but the reality is, guess what? You think Johnny doesn't know that if he finished his homework, he could go out and play? So then the kid just feels like, well, mom and dad just don't understand me. They think I don't care, right? So that's, again, why I say we have to start by understanding the child.
Right, right. Let's talk about grades for a moment.
Okay.
Parents really tend to become hyper fixated on grades, but in reality, okay, grades, they do some sort of reflect like school success, and they do matter in sort of ways, like they help with getting into good schools and starting well, in life. But what about when a child is really trying hard and still not achieving straight A's? Like, how can we help parents to, pass that fixation?
Okay, so let's talk about grades and let's talk about parents fixating on grades. Here's the reality. Grades are not always an indicator of intelligence. We know that. There could be times where the kid studied really hard and showed up for the test. And again, remember we talk about executive function. Maybe he got distracted. Maybe he was feeling, anxious about something. All of these different things can be impacting his ability to perform. So now he didn't do well. And now he's feeling negative about himself, and that can start to spiral. But my concern with parents focusing on grades is that they're not, at the expense of focusing on that, they're not focusing on building their executive function skills, such as I want my kid to know how he studies best. I want my kid to know how to make sure he got his homework done, how to manage his time. Homework is that big bear that a lot of drives a lot of parents crazy. But if you think about it, homework is the best time to talk about that life skill of time management. How are you going to prioritize your work? How are you going to decide which is the most important thing to do first and last? How are you going to break up your work so that you stay with it? What does a break look like for me? All of these different considerations. So rather than fixating on grades, worry about how am I going to help my kid be the best learner he can be? And if I could say one other thing, let's talk about that college readiness and that whole idea of going off to college or whatever that next step is. For some kids, it's the best next step. But for some kids, they need a break. They need to re-engage. They need to decide that they want to learn. So rather than pushing them through, let's talk about what's the most logical next step. But let's not talk about that when they're in their last 2 years of high school, because then they're just going to start to feel like, oh, you don't think I can make it in school. Let's talk about that as if that's a normal conversation all along the line so that they are active participants.
To align expectations between the two, right? Nice. A lot of your work, what you do, is about setting healthy boundaries for kids. Can you share some tips on how parents can set boundaries in a way that makes kids feel confident and empowered rather than, just overwhelmed by too many rules that we set?
Right, right. All right, so let's talk about boundaries. What makes an effective boundary? An effective boundary is where the kid feels enough stress, internal stress, to say, hey, I want to meet that expectation, that boundary. I understand it. It makes sense to me. Because if they look at the boundary as something that they just want to fight against, guess what they're going to do? They're going to fight against it, right? So we need to create our boundaries again with the kid through a collaborative conversation. And collaborative problem solving is something that I do a lot of teaching around for both the parents and the educators. It's a process that I teach because it's not just a lot of parents feel like, oh, I talked to my kid about it and I told them why this made sense and everything. Well, that's great, but a lot of times people say what they think the other person needs to hear to get out of what they needed to get out of, right? So it's not about that. It's about what is the right boundary that the kid feels makes sense for them.
Right. Um, and when it's really when it comes down to discipline, a lot of parents really yell or throw out empty threats, thinking it'll scare their kids into listening or to doing something. But we all know that rarely works. If a parent wants to actually help their ADHD child learn without punishment, what do you think they really should try instead of that?
Yeah. So, consequences. What I teach parents is let's understand the difference between punishment and discipline, right? When we think about punishment, we think about that external control. When we think about discipline, we think about internal, like self discipline is a good thing, right? I have a lot of good self discipline. I'm proud of that. So when we think about punishing kids, we really want to reframe that and say, what does my kid understand about why this boundary is there and what's going to happen if they break it beforehand? And so that if they break it, I have to let life take its course. In other words, if my kid knows that, he needs to clean up the bathroom that we all share before I'm going to take him to soccer practice. And now he comes to me and says, come on, we're going to be late for soccer practice. And I say, the bathroom. And he starts yelling and screaming, but you don't want me to be late. Like, how could you let me be late? I'm going to let down the team and everything else. I say, okay, well, as soon as you clean up the bathroom, I can take you because you knew that weeks ago. You made some choices to not prioritize that. To me, I'm okay with that consequence. I wouldn't be okay with it if I just decide I'm just so tired of what a mess you leave. You know what? Clean if you don't clean up the bathroom, I'm not taking you. That's very different. We don't want to be that reactive. We want to be proactive.
Right. And can we think that ahead of time? Like, I know that parents struggle with that because when they get caught up in this moment, they're just not thinking. Like, how can we, plan it forward? Like, what would you suggest?
Right. So how can we plan forward to have to have things work? How can we plan forward before we just give these spontaneous things? The first thing I tell parents is you have to realize that there are patterns of behavior. Very often, parents will come to me and say, he always does this or she never does that. I'm like, wow, that's great. That's good information because now we can step back and say, okay, how can we problem solve around this? Because I know it's going to come up again. But we also have to be forgiving because there are these strange situations. There are these times where the kid is going to act out or do something that, is misbehavior or, not meeting our expectations, where I might let it slide because I realize, hey, you know what? This kid had a really unusually bad day. Don't you have a bad day sometimes? I have a bad day sometimes. I don't want to be held to that same standard all the time. So that's where your compassion and your empathy and your knowledge and your confidence in your own parenting comes into play.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. What about common ADHD symptoms like fidgeting? Say the kid's studying or in a class while he's chewing on collars or tapping their feet. Should parents or teachers really let them do it to burn off their energy, or does it just make their restlessness even worse? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so let's talk about fidgeting. Some people need to fidget. It's not a problem that they're fidgeting, it's are they being distracting to others or are they being destructive? Like, you know how that pen cap is always broken off, right? Or the kid's waving it or they're clicking the pen or something like that. What we want to do is we can't just stop the fidgeting because that fidgeting is actually activating the underactive part of the brain. It's serving a purpose. What we want to do is help them understand why they're fidgeting and how could they fidget so that they're not being distracting or destructive. And fidgeting can take lots of different forms. It can be physical movement, it could be twirling my hair, it could be having a little Velcro under my desk that I just feel. It could be standing up at a standing desk, which, by the way, it doesn't have to be a big, expensive, gorgeous standing desk. It could be a cardboard box on top of your desk, right? Music. A lot of parents will say, well, my kid wants to listen to music while he's studying, and I don't want him to because that's distracting. I'll say the same thing. Is it distracting him or is it kind of like white noise that's in the background for him? If it's his new favorite song that he wants to learn, maybe that's distracting. If it's a song he knows by heart, maybe it's just kind of drowning out some of the other noises and allowing him to study. So again, it's all in connection with our child.
As opposed of that, what if it actually is like messing with the teacher's progress or messing with the surroundings? What can a teacher do in this case?
Yeah. So one of the things I tell teachers about fidgeting is teach the whole class what fidgeting is, what purpose it serves, etc., etc. And you might find after you teach it that, a lot of the kids are all of a sudden fidgeting and everything. That's okay. Let them experiment. Because the reality is over time, the ones that really don't need it are going to get bored with it. And the ones that really need it are going to learn, hey, I need to do this in an acceptable, appropriate way. Because as the teacher, if I just take away that fidget, their need did not go away. So one of two things is going to happen. Either the kid is going to find some other way to fidget that may not be appropriate, like bothering his, neighbor, or remember I said that fidgeting actually activates the underactive part of the brain? So what might end up happening is his brain gets sleepy. And now you've got a kid who's not paying attention. He's spacing out. And you're wondering, why doesn't he pay attention? Well, because you're not allowing him to do what he needs to do.
Brilliant. In one of your interviews, you talked about how not singling out kids with ADHD, especially if they're in a class with other peers. Can you share more about how teachers and parents should handle this? And also, why is this approach good for kids?
What we're doing when we point out a kid's bad behavior in front of anyone else, whether it's the classroom or even the kid's sibling, is we're creating a dynamic of, first of all, hierarchy, because now everyone else is more skilled and better than that kid. We're creating a lot of shame and we're not building a skill. What we're doing is we're helping that kid. Remember, I said about the brain, he's getting all stressed out, so he can't access his thinking part of the brain, right? And now he's feeling shame and embarrassment. So he's not able to move forward. He's not able to hear what we're saying. He's not able to learn and listen. And we're not building any skills for him.
Exactly, exactly. In your practice, you help parents identify their child's behavior patterns and avoid generalizing, right? But how can parents really move past the mindset of, I know my kid, this is who they are, and they'll never change, times like that, to truly see their kids' immense potential? Um, how can we move past that?
That's a beautiful question. So, how can we help kids move past the, or parents really move past that idea that my kid can't do and this is the way he is and that's just what it's going to be? I encourage parents What you pay attention to grows. If you are paying attention to all of those things that your kid is doing that are driving you crazy, that are stressing you out, that are not productive, that's what you're seeing. I encourage you, look at some of the good things they're doing. And why am I saying do that? Very often it's sort of the expression like, let sleeping dogs lie, right? Like if it's doing okay, just ignore it. But the thing is, when we highlight it, then we're highlighting it for the kid. They start to feel better about themselves. And we're also recognizing it for ourselves as well. I understand we need to put out the fires, we need to deal with those stressful things, but we're going to do that by helping the kid feel better about himself as someone who has potential. So I think it's just as important to pay attention to those things.
Okay, so let's move now to the rapid fire questions. What would be your best parenting advice in less than 60 seconds?
My best parenting advice is wonder why. When your kid, if you say to your kid, hey, Johnny, do me a favor, go up your backpack, your shoes, your tennis racket. On the way down, could you grab my water bottle and see if I turn my light off? And the kid doesn't come out with anything. What's the emotion we're feeling in our bodies? Stress, anger, frustration. Instead, wonder why Johnny didn't come down. And then, of course, learn all about what are some of the reasons why Johnny didn't come down.
Exactly. Thanks for sharing that. And why do you think this summit is a must attend for parents of kids with ADHD?
Thank you. I think this summit is so important because you really have gathered so many experts. And I have to say, I've been on a lot of summits and you ask really good questions. You took the time to get to know me and my practice so you knew what to ask me that will allow your audience to learn what I want to teach. So I think it's very valuable.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that so much. What's the one unexpected way that parents can instantly connect with their child?
It's very interesting. One of the things I tell parents I want them to do is spend one-on-one time with each of their kids that's non-productive, that's child-centered. And what I mean by that is let the kid choose what the activity is. And a lot of parents will say, well, my kid's going to choose video games or Barbie dolls or building. I don't want to do any of those things. You would be amazed if you give that chance and spend that time that the kid wants to spend. They get to shine, they get to be the expert, they get to show what they can do, and they get to feel good about themselves. And you get more opportunities to praise them and enjoy them. And that's one of the things I would definitely suggest.
That is brilliant. Does ADHD become less of an issue or more of a struggle as our kids grow?
So, does ADHD become more of a struggle as kids grow or less of a struggle as kids grow? Here's my answer. Kids hit the wall at different times of their life. Sometimes the kids hit the wall at kindergarten because now all of a sudden they're expected to stay in a classroom and do certain behaviors. Sometimes they don't hit that wall until, middle school, where now all of a sudden they have lots of different teachers. Sometimes they don't hit that wall until high school, where the workload becomes so much harder because again, remember many of these kids are highly intelligent and they've been able to compensate all these years. But I will tell you that some people don't hit that wall until they're in the work world or they become parents or they, get married or move in with a spouse because we tend to find those stressors and those challenges when things change. So we have to realize that it can happen at any stage of life. The most important thing is get educated about ADHD, right? Learn the strategies and tools that are good for you, not just good for people with ADHD, right? My best strategy is not your best strategy.
Exactly. Find your way to help them. Okay, we've talked about homework before, but whose responsibility is homework really? Teachers, parents, or kids or students?
I think that's such a great question. Whose responsibility is homework management? Well, here's the question I always ask parents and teachers, by the way. What grade do we teach good homework management skills? And the answer I usually get is, huh, we don't really teach that. Or we teach that like in third grade. Well, the homework management skills you need in third grade are not the same ones you need as you get older. So I think it's the responsibility in my best world of the educators, of the teachers. Teach about homework management, teach how to prioritize, teach how to break up the work, all of those things. And teach the parents that too. Let them be your allies. I do so many parent presentations when I go into school districts and I train the teachers, usually either the night before or the night after. I will do some parent talks where I'm really educating the parents around what I was talking to the teachers about.
Extensive, definitely. Thank you so much again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.